Friends, this is Richard Wolff. Let me start bluntly. When a politician promises you free money, the first thing you should ask is whose pocket did he cut open to get it? Because it was not his. Donald Trump now wants you to believe that a $2,000 check has magically appeared, paid for by other countries through his tariffs. That isn't economic policy. That's a con trick with a flag wrapped around it. He calls it a tariff dividend. Sounds sophisticated, almost like you're a shareholder in America finally getting your payout. But shareholders get paid from profits. Here, the profit is a tax he slapped on the things you buy every week: coffee, clothes, cars, even the bananas on your kid's breakfast table. Trump's message is simple and seductive. We'll tax foreign nations at the border, and I'll send you the money. The twist, the one he never says out loud, is that foreign nations don't pay those tariffs. American companies do. And then they pass the bill to you. Under US law, the importer of record pays the tariff. That's Walmart, Target, Amazon, your local manufacturer importing parts. They pay at the port, then they raise prices at the store. The exporter in China or Europe doesn't wire a cent to the US Treasury. The cash flow runs from your wallet to your government via the corporate checkout counter. We've already seen what that looks like in real life. Coffee prices up 40%, bananas up nearly 9%, everyday goods quietly ratcheted higher. You feel it not in a headline, but in the empty space in your cart when you decide what you can no longer afford. That's the tariff you're paying before a single check is printed. Trump now promises at least $2,000 per person for low and middle income Americans. With roughly 220 million adults under the usual income cutoffs, that's a $440 billion promise, easily swelling towards 600 billion if the amount rises or dependents are added. Meanwhile, annual tariff revenue hovers around $300 billion at best. Do the math. You cannot fund a $600 billion program with $300 billion revenue and simultaneously pay down a $37 trillion national debt. That is not creative economics. That is arithmetic, refusing to salute the former president. So, what is really happening here? The government quietly collects a scattered consumption tax from millions of Americans through higher prices, pools that money in Washington, and then Trump steps in front of the cameras and announces he will heroically give it back as a dividend. It's like setting your house on fire, then charging admission to watch him hand you a bucket of water. And behind the staging, the damage is real. The poorest Americans, those who spend nearly all their income on goods, pay the highest effective share of these hidden taxes. The relief check arrives only after months of inflated prices have already eaten away their purchasing power. For many, the $2,000 won't feel like a bonus. It will feel like getting a small refund on a bill they never agreed to pay. Picture the scene: a family at a grocery store staring at a receipt that has climbed 20% in 2 years, while a banner on the TV above the checkout screams, "Trump promises $2,000 tariff dividend." The cart is lighter, the bill is heavier, and the government is already counting the money it plans to mail back to them later as an act of generosity. That is the core contradiction of this plan. The same policy that funds the check is quietly shrinking the value of that check before it ever reaches your account. It is a stimulus built on a self-inflicted wound, and the bruise is already visible in every inflated price tag across the country. If the hidden tax was the first lie, the math is the second, and this one is brutal. Trump's own numbers give the game away. He's talking about a program that would reach roughly 85% of American adults, about 220 million people at $2,000 each. That is $440 billion. Raise the amount a bit, add dependents, and you are staring at a $600 billion liability. Meanwhile, tariff revenue this year tops out around 300 billion. You don't need a PhD to see the whole. A high school calculator would do. Now put that next to Washington's real balance sheet. In one recent month, the federal deficit, the gap between what the government spends and what it collects, hit $345 billion. In a single month, the government overspent more than the tariffs bring in all year. So when Trump says he will use that same 300 billion to fund a $600 billion stimulus and pay down a $37 trillion national debt, he is not offering you a plan. He is offering you a fantasy designed to survive exactly one election cycle. Here's the twist. Once you strip away the arithmetic, the scheme suddenly makes sense, not as economics, but as electoral strategy. The timetable floated from the Oval Office has checks hitting mailboxes in late summer or early fall, just before midterm voters head to the polls. Imagine it. $2,000 appears in your account, the campaign ads roll nonstop, and every envelope, every direct deposit is branded in the public mind as Trump's dividend. But there is a catch, and it's a big one. Unlike the tariffs themselves, which Trump rammed through under executive authority, this $600 billion cash blast cannot be created with a signature and a rally speech. It requires legislation. Congress has to vote for it. That is where the trap is set. Picture Capitol Hill under the bright TV lights. Republican leadership drops a bill to send $2,000 to nearly every low and middle income household in America, right in peak campaign season. Democrats face a lose-lose choice. Vote no, and you hand Trump the perfect attack ad. We tried to give you $2,000, they blocked it. Vote yes, and you bless a policy you know is underfunded, inflationary, and mathematically dishonest. That isn't debate. It is political blackmail. It weaponizes people's desperation, turns the basic question, can I pay my bills, into a lever to crush any serious fiscal argument. You either sign the check or you are branded as the enemy of your own constituents. And even if this hostage vote passes, the entire structure is built on legal quicksand. Those tariffs that are supposed to fund everything are under fire at the Supreme Court. If the justices rule that Trump's trade war exceeded executive authority, tariff revenue could collapse from around 300 billion to under 100 billion. Imagine a skyscraper where the foundation is quietly sawed through at night. The lights are still on, the elevators still move, but one ruling, one legal paragraph, and the whole tower drops. Technically, the machinery to send the money exists. The government would almost certainly use an advance refundable tax credit the same tool used for the 2020 and 2021 stimulus. You don't need to owe tax to get paid. Retirees, disabled Americans, Social Security recipients, veterans all could qualify as long as their income falls under the familiar 75,000 and 150,000 thresholds. The rhetoric will talk endlessly about working families, but the database will quietly sweep in anyone below the line, whether they're in a factory, on a farm, or surviving on a fixed check. On camera, it will look like a massive act of generosity, direct deposits flashing on phones, paper checks stacked in postal bins, a president claiming to have forced other countries to bankroll America's recovery. Off camera, the reality is colder, higher prices, deeper debt, a weaponized Congress, and a program balanced on a legal knife edge ready to vanish with a single gavel strike. That is not economic leadership. It is governing with other people's lives as disposable props in a televised stunt. All of this would be bad enough if the tariff dividend were merely a clumsy stimulus. It is worse than that. It is the monetization of a failed industrial policy, dressed up as a gift. Remember why these tariffs were sold in the first place: to bring factories back, to revive American manufacturing, to make Made in USA the engine of a new middle class. That was the promise. The record looks very different. Since the broad tariffs kicked in, the manufacturing sector has not experienced a renaissance. In key periods, it has shed tens of thousands of jobs. Investment in new plants has been patchy, hesitant, often redirected overseas to avoid the next executive tantrum. Companies do not build billion-dollar facilities on shifting sand. They follow stability, not slogans. And here is the twist that exposes the whole game. When a policy actually works, you invest its success into long-term strength infrastructure, research, education, high-tech industry. When it fails, you try to rebrand the wreckage. Turning tariff revenue into a one-time check is not a victory lap. It is a pivot away from the original goal, a desperate attempt to make a politically popular use out of a tool that has not delivered what was promised. The trade war also did not happen in a vacuum. Other countries retaliated, of course they did. They targeted American exports precisely where it hurts the most politically: agriculture and key manufacturing exports. Soybean farmers losing entire markets they spent decades building. Machinery exporters priced out of Europe. Motorcycle makers shifting production abroad to dodge EU tariffs. The same forgotten workers Trump loves to invoke at rallies are the ones being ground down in the crossfire. So picture this: a farmer in Iowa standing in an empty barn where tractors sit idle, staring at a letter telling him he will get $2,000 from the great tariff dividend. His export contracts are gone, his prices are crushed by retaliation. The check in his hand is not a reward, it is compensation for a wound the policy itself inflicted. Meanwhile, the deeper structural damage continues. Global companies are watching a United States that governs trade via tweet, executive order, and legal gamble. They see tariffs that may be upheld or struck down. They see stimulus promises that may or may not be funded, and they plan accordingly. They put their factories in Mexico, Vietnam, Eastern Europe, anywhere the rules are boring and predictable. The result is the opposite of what was advertised. More fragmented supply chains, more offshoring, more uncertainty for American workers. Then there is the macroeconomic punchline, injecting hundreds of billions of dollars into an already high deficit, high debt economy, while also driving up prices through tariffs, sends a brutal message. Holding cash is a losing game. Savers see their purchasing power leak away. Rational actors flee into assets, stocks, real estate, commodities. The people who already own those assets get richer. The people who live paycheck to paycheck, who see $2,000 as a lifeline, are pushed further behind with every inflation report. That is the quiet redistribution embedded in Trump's plan, from consumers to corporations via higher prices, from taxpayers to bondholders via more debt, from workers without assets to investors who ride the asset boom triggered by permanent stimulus politics. The check is loud, the transfer is silent. Economically, the tariff dividend is incoherent. Politically, it is ruthless and ingenious. It converts a self-imposed trade tax into a televised act of generosity. It weaponizes Congress. It gambles on the Supreme Court. It turns genuine economic pain into a backdrop for a single man's branding exercise. The cinematic image, if you want one, is not the president at a podium promising $2,000 for every American. It is the wide shot above a supermarket, a farm, a factory floor, millions of people paying more each day so that one politician can step onto a stage later and play the role of savior with their own money. That is not a dividend. It is a bill they have already been forced to pay. There is one more layer to this that we need to face honestly. What it does to the political culture of a country already addicted to short-term fixes. When a government starts pairing every major policy with a cash payout, it is not just doing economics, it is rewriting the social contract into something closer to a loyalty program. Points, perks, payouts, all tied not to long-term performance, but to whoever happens to hold the pen in the Oval Office. We've seen versions of this before: stimulus checks in crises, targeted supports in recessions measures born from emergency. The difference here is intent. This is not about stabilizing an economy on the brink. This is about weaponizing fiscal policy as a routine campaign tactic. Create a problem, tax people through hidden prices, then promise to refund a portion of the damage just in time for the vote. The twist is that once this logic takes hold, it does not stop with Trump. Any future administration will be under pressure to outbid the last one. If $2,000 bought a bump in approval, why not 3,000? If tariffs funded one round, why not new fees on something else? Climate tariffs, digital tariffs, financial transaction levies, each framed as a clever way to make someone else pay, each ultimately pushed onto ordinary households through prices, fees, and slow-burning inflation. Over time, the line between policy and bribe erodes. Voters are no longer asked what kind of economy they want to build. They are asked what size check they expect to receive. Public debate shrinks from questions of wages, unions, health care, taxation of the rich, to a single infantilizing metric. How big is my cut? That is not democracy. That is clientelism with better production values. And underneath the spectacle, the real structural questions go unanswered. Why are wages stagnant? Why are healthcare and housing eating larger and larger shares of income? Why are corporate profits hitting records while basic infrastructure crumbles? Why is the tax code still engineered to favor owners of capital over people who live on labor? None of that is fixed by one more round of headline cash. What Trump's tariff dividend really does is train people to look down at their bank app instead of up at the system that created their insecurity. As long as a deposit lands now and then, however underfunded, however inflation soaked, the deeper mechanisms of extraction remain untouched. The asset holders keep compounding wealth. The political class keeps cycling through theatrical fights over who blocked your check. The structural imbalance between work and capital, between voters and the billionaire class funding both parties, stays firmly in place. So the most dangerous legacy of this proposal may not be the debt or the inflation or even the trade chaos. It may be the normalization of government by gimmick, where every serious conversation about industrial policy, tax, justice, or social protection is drowned out by a single crude question: who gave you money last? In that world, the citizen is reduced to a customer, the ballot to a coupon, and the economy to a stage where crisis is permanent and spectacle is the only product that never runs out.